Hi guys, I have been working on this project for probably a month now, and it turned out to just take a lot longer than I expected. It was a shit ton of fun though, and I really hope you guys are gonna like it. This is Heteronormativity and Deltarune, How Norms Poison Art and Life. Presented by me, who's supposed to be standing right there, and it took so long for both us to finish the chapter and in general
that I had to go to college, so now I'm streaming this to you.
Okay. So, we're gonna begin with a little bit of a prelude. So, you may be thinking, isn't Hometown a pretty queer-friendly place? Well, yes. However, Hometown treats straightness as the default. Here are some examples. We got the King and Queen contest. We've got Birdley always sticking, how Birdley always sticks to Noelle, then Susie, then Chris. We have the nose nuzzling contest, which is just obviously meant to put people like Asgore and Toriel together. Maybe that one's a little debatable. And as I mentioned again, King and Queen contest. We're going to be coming back to that one specifically a lot. Okay. Now you may be thinking, oh, well maybe that's a bit of an oversight. That's wrong. That's not only wrong, it is a bit ignorant. Because this is deeply intentional, and all we have to do is look at Undertale. All three of these scenarios are characters experiencing relations, like revelations with their gender or their relationship or their sexuality, and these characters are not pressured by the society they're in to the decisions they make. Metaton wants a new body. Papyrus kind of realizes he's not into romance. And these two, Undyne and...
Bro, I kept forgetting Alphys's name. This is one of 2 times I forget the name.
They are in lesbians with each other, and they are not, they are not opposed to each other or scared of this relationship because of their society. They're just nervous, weird people. Okay, so bearing that in mind, at times Hometown gets pretty fucking ugly, and we're gonna move to part 1, Susie and Chris. Now, this chapter, heads up, is a little bit of setup, so you might be thinking a bit, how does this tie to heteronormativity? Let me cook. Chris and Susie have always been the subject of scrutiny. Why? I pick on Monster Kids specifically here because they are easy examples for bullying Chris and Susie specifically. So let's look at Susie first because she is a bit of an easier starting point. Susie is an outcast for not fitting in and not presenting in a way that works with the norm. We can see Susie immediately jumping to being king in the festival. In the weird route, she questions why the contest is for king and queen. And in her dressing minigame for chapter 5, she says her royal dress, the most feminine option, claims that she will be normal and good should she choose that attire. It is very clear that Susie's not only attitude, questioning attitude, but her overall aesthetic, which is honestly, if I had to put it close to anything, is basically a butch vibe, doesn't jive with the town. They are not okay with that because they can't box her in. And that is one of the key sources of Susie's rejection within town. Chris is a bigger bucket of worms. We'll notice immediately that Chris is always wearing Asriel's clothing. Why? We'll get to that. So, I bring up these screenshots, and don't worry, we'll address the Asriel elephant in the room eventually. But we will address the Asriel elephant in the room eventually, but let's just say that Chris, as a human, has experienced a lot of discrimination within the town because of their differences. Let's look at, for instance, the kids who have no connection to Chris. Literally, like one example of chapter 1, does it hurt to be made of blood? Chris wears Azriel's clothing in some senses, to relate them closer to monsters, to give them a sense of comfort and relatability to other people. Bratty is an easy example. But they also wear it to essentially give them a bit, the hometown, a bit more comfortability in picturing them within a gender. It's something non-binary people struggle with a lot, is being recognized as non-binary, because a lot of people want to box them into a category anyways. By wearing Azriel's clothing, Chris is comfortably manly enough that they don't have to really rethink their perception of Chris, put it that way. Welcome to man country. Non-men are A-okay too. Now, this is strong evidence for Chris being assigned male at birth, but it is not the only evidence pointing for or against this fact. It is simply an important aspect of why Chris dresses like Azriel. Okay. But what about in the dark world? Because this is where we see both Chris and Susie develop the most. Let's look at Chris. So, and I promise we'll come back to Susie in a minute. In chapter 1, Susie is... Did I just say Susie? It's late, y'all. In chapter 1, we get the basic Chris outfit. It's iconic. Chapter 2 and 3 start to expand that register. But notice, especially within Chapter 3's outfits, they all lean masculine. This is what really ties me to the Azriel clothing, assigned male at birth sort of reading, because Chris is still experimenting with clothing, but they are experimenting with something they are comfortable with. By this chapter, Chris is fucking with clothes. Every clothing option they have has a variant. I mean, you can see, dress and heels versus pants and regular shoes, a tie versus a bow, literally aqua versus yellow, and these two Ace Attorney characters, one of which I believe is Edgeworth, and the other one is Francesca, which was one of the other enemy attorneys in one of the Ace Attorney games. I don't know, I'm not familiar enough with Ace Attorney. In comparison, we get Light World Chris, which is essentially appealing to people. They are not what Chris wants to be, and we get to see Chris's experimentation with their own gender, something they might not be able to do within a hometown. Chris, in fact, is very, sluggish and unhappy whenever they are moving without a soul. Not only because they are physically weakened by it, but I read it, in fact, it's just like Chris is not happy with who they are. And when we are not controlling them, they are just moving through the world in that demeanor. And they might do that regardless of, a soul or not, had that been prior to the soul. Okay, now, if we're talking Chris, and I promise we'll get back to Susie. If we're talking Chris, we have to take a brief detour to Chris and autonomy. Because Light World Chris has no autonomy even when they rip out the soul. I mean, we know that the Roaring group chat has influence over Chris. It is clearly not just a partnership. Something is there that they have some sort of power over Chris. It might be small, but they have it. Chris lacks autonomy to be themselves, present themselves, and with the soul, they don't even have control over themselves. And every time they have, it's to do someone else's bidding. And what's worse, one of the few times we hear about Chris expressing genuine autonomy is in Chapter 4's Weird Route.
Chris, there was something else you did. You said not to mention you did any of this.
This is between Chapters 3 and 4. A rare moment where we get to find out that Chris, in fact, does have some autonomy when we are not playing. Chris goes to visit Noelle, and they tell Noelle not to mention any of this. To their horror, they are saying this while the player is present. When Chris is confronted about this in front of the soul, they start warning Noelle that someone is going to hear you. That's just really what I want to emphasize. Chris does not have autonomy. That is one of the biggest points, and this isn't just this isn't just relevant to Chris and gender, although it is a very important aspect of it. You can apply that to much of literary analysis about Deltarune. To a lesser degree, you can see the same transformation in Susie, obviously from a more monstrous person to a more joyful and happy person, simply because she was allowed to experience treatment like a normal person, and friendship, things we take for granted that Susie was not given. I mentioned Susie within the gender stuff because her relationship with Chris is important. But even then, like I said, what I will say is Flowery in Chapter 5 does teach Susie to mess around with their gender just a little. She's comfortable, but that doesn't mean she has to be refusing things like bows. This clothing change, for instance, a tie to a little ribbon, it's very simple stuff, but that is the kind of evolutions we see over time with Susie. Now, these two together, we love them. It's why Susie and Chris, to some extent, grow so much within themselves in the Dark World, because the Dark World doesn't give a fuck who you are. Frankly, Susie and Chris are able to strike such a strong connection through their adventures in the Dark World. We see Susie and Chris each accepting parts of themselves in each other that they have not experienced acceptance from anyone else around them, adults, other teenagers, other people. It gives them confidence to move around in the world in ways that they were not able to beforehand. I think this scene that I'm highlighting right here with Susie holding Chris's knife and Chris blushing is one of my personal favorites. It is a raw moment from Chris, not the player, Chris exposing something deeply personal to them, and Susie unflinchingly accepting them. That is something Chris rarely ever sees throughout the entirety of the game. And for it to happen so nonchalantly is a beautiful little moment. Chris is a big deal to Susie. Whatever they are is cooler. I want to highlight this scene. It's hard to put into words, but for some reason, seeing Susie next to you, you felt like whatever you were, for just right now, it might be okay. Their treatment and the way the Dark World aligns them is important to understanding the way Hometown functions. So, with that in mind, here's some more fun stuff. I probably had a little bit more to say when I made this about, the Dark World. Let's dig into the Dark World a little bit before we finally dig into how Hometown works. The Dark World does not have concepts of heteronormativity. The ridiculous child we befriend in Chapter 1 has 4 dads, one of which is a woman, none of which have any semblance of traditional parentage, and yet they all genuinely love and go out of their way to care for Lancer. Hell, we also have a throuple exploration, which is fucking hilarious. And this is the kind of thing that you wouldn't see in Hometown. Now, I'm not saying I ship these 3, but what I am saying is they wouldn't have a chance to explore this connection in the light world to begin with, even if it would fail. Okay, now, let's connect this back to Hometown, because having all of this prejudice set up, we can better understand why Hometown, we can better understand the ground level we are working at when we analyze the behaviors of Hometown. Because Chapter 2 is about kings and queens. Now, Hometown King and Queen is obviously the most heteronormative roles in the game. There's an easy fix to this. You just call them Hometown Royalty. But clearly that was not the intent. Again, I've said this before, Toby Fox is very particular in these sorts of things. This was not an unintentional misgendering. It is intended to put the characters in uncomfortable situations. We'll see more about that later. King and Queen are seen as defaults, to the point where, for instance, this dialogue as Rudy suggests that it's a possibility that there will be 2 queens. This isn't a problem if they are named royalty, because royalty includes everyone by default. Hometown might be okay if there are 2 queens on average, but the inherentness of naming it a king and queen royalty, like a king and queen competition, puts the straight couples in mind first. And we see these sorts of things affect the people in town. I love this example of the strength bonder, which is makes for an adorable little moment between Susie and Noelle. It also made for an adorable little moment between Rudy and Asgore. And look, it is easy to sit here and ship Asgore and Rudy versus Asgore and Toriel, but what I am saying here is that in this competition, it was obviously going to be Asgore and Toriel. Asgore and Rudy never stood a chance. That is not saying that Asgore and Toriel shouldn't be together. It is simply a fascinating observation that these people, these 2 could not connect in the way that this strength tester suggested they might, because of the way Hometown's King and Queen competition was laid out. And in a similar vein, we see in dialogue, if you choose to pair Noelle and Chris in the King and Queen competition, in any order, Noelle reflects on the fact that she remembers when Chris and I were little.
I told Chris that we should put our names in instead. How could the 2 of us win?
And if you go on the Ferris wheel with Noelle afterwards, she reflects on the fact that
They couldn't even agree on who should be king or queen.
Hometown isn't opposed to queer couples winning, but they're conditioned to think first of the straight couples. Breaking through these boundaries for someone like Susie and Noelle winning king and queen is possible, but it is hard, and it also puts queer couples in an awkward position where someone has to fill the masculine and feminine roles. Which is why it is so bad for Chris, because you have to give Chris a gender to vote for them, which is something they explicitly do not want. Now, I know what you're thinking. I've been talking a little bit about Asgore, Toriel, Rudy. I know one of you in there, your sharp little mind, you think about Carol too. Who do you want? Who do we want? It's a big shipping war, and if I had to choose, it's fucking all of them every time. Okay? To better grasp why, when I say king and queen in the Dark World, what do you think of? The Dark World characters, no? But what are they in the Dark World, really? They're just names. They happen to be parents of what are they're just names. They happen to be parents of Lancer, but they're not really in. I did my best. They're not in any real relationship. The title reflects basically your dominance over the realms. They're not monogamous at all. Queen fucks over ideas of patriarchy. We play Punch-Out against her. Punch-Out is a and like has a historically masculine franchise, and we play Punch-Out against her. She's amazing. Hell, before we even learn about King's sharing parental duties with Rules. Fucking Rules is turning around to join every fucking throuple around the sun. So you sort of get my picture. Again, when I say heteronormativity doesn't apply to the dark world, it's not even in the book. No one knows the concept. They are just who they are. Compared to the light world, the dominant forces of Hometown are monogamous, rigid, separated. Toriel and Asgore divorced. Carol and Rudy dislike each other. The families once reflected a sort of unit of 4 parents and 4 kids. Chris is a bit reminiscent of Lancer in that regard. Lancer is a little gremlin. He loves jokes, screwing around. His parents deeply love them. Chris had Toriel, Asgore, Rudy, Carol, and was a fucking gremlin. But now, they split. Asgore lost his job. Toriel and Asgore divorced. Toriel and Asgore are both struggling to get by. Carol still runs the town, but she's a fucking asshole. And also evil! Rudy is dying alone! And Chris still visits her family. Like he's family. And Lancer is over here gaining parents every fucking chapter. This is their downfall. King and Queen have to be together, regardless to what other ties they've got. When the family split, the kids did too. Noelle and Chris barely talk, Asriel's gone, Des is missing. In the same way that Chris is denied their identity, these 4 are denied of whatever relationship they had with each other, and it shatters them. Now, I don't think you guys are very skeptical, but just in case, if you don't believe me, this isn't headcanon. This isn't even subtext. We gotta look at Flowery. Because Flowery's teasing in that old 2000s anime style is very important to his characters. The way Flowery teases people is evocative of this moment in Orin for a reason. You are the homosexual supporting cast. It is evocative of 2000s anime, manga, and homophobia. This is a screenshot from Angel Beats on the left. I love Angel Beats. It has an ongoing homophobic joke. It's kind of funny in the subtitles because they go,
Are you that way?
but they are clearly othering gay people. Or horrible shows like Kiss Him Not Me, which are just queerbait. I watched it knowing it was queerbait because I was looking for some shitty TV, and it was still one of the worst shows I've ever watched. So you sort of get what I mean. But that's the thing. Flowery plays on this stuff for a reason. Asgore is clearly a weeb. Now, look, I'm over here when I was researching this and thinking, oh man, there isn't a bunch of textual evidence that Asgore's a weeb. And then I remembered, look at his fucking dark world. It's all Japanese-inspired architecture. And also, we do have, sorry for this comically low-quality screenshot, I found this online, of the Mew Mew comic in question that causes Mew Mew's appearance. Lent. Why am I blanking on her fucking name again? Okay. I don't know why I'm failing. Okay, anyways. Okay. He's talking in a language Asgore gets. Let's look at these two. Flowery and Asgore both have a fairly red-green color palette. Look at Flowery's vest. Look at Asgore's clothes. Did I say Rudy? Asgore? Rudy. Yes, Rudy, of course. I meant Rudy. They have their hand out with a cup in hand, and that's Sprite. They wear similar clothes. Look at a vest, long sleeves. They both wear pants and nice shoes. They even have similar haircuts. You can't see Rudy's very well because it's pitch black, but they literally have the same number of hair swoops in both their overworld sprites, and their actual sprite art, like portrait sprites. And they have similar faces. Thanks to Elias for pointing this whole thing out. It's just amazing supplemental evidence I would not have gotten without him. Now, I know you guys, you need more proof than this. Let's look at Flowery and Susie's relationship. Because seeing how Flowery treats other people will help inform how his treatment of Asgore really makes sense. Flowery calls Susie Princess despite her clear preference for King. Why? Let's look into her equipment of ribbons this chapter. You know, Susie finally starts wearing ribbons as fist wraps this chapter. But she also does wear one traditional ribbon, the one Flowery gave her. Again, I'm basically just calling back to the slides I made previously because I kind of already made this point. It's spiky. Flowery isn't trying to get her to fit within gender norms for being, you know, what is standard for being a woman. He's just trying to show that there is room for experimentation. Susie doesn't ditch her butch vibes with any of her outfits this chapter. They're all still masculine. She's just willing to be a little bit more experimental on the details. Now, Flowery and Tralsei is a whole bucket of worms that we will get into. Here are some of my favorites. Also, Gershon shout-out, GOAT. Tralsei starts this chapter by being shoved into a closet. We've talked about it. You know, Flowery rage baits Tralsei into having opinions, into expressing himself. And if that's not enough, there's one time when Flowery breaks character. When Tralsei's alone with Flowery, Flowery refers to him as Princess. And not so subtly pushes him towards the drink he really wanted. The pink and blue one. I mean, look. Trans flag, or Chris, whichever way you read it, he's pushing Tralsei in directions to be autonomous in a way, and expressive of all sorts of aspects of his personality that he's actively avoiding because he wants to follow certain appearances. And that doesn't even get into the weeds of the other flowers present. I mean, we've got Aqua, which is herself a whole suggestion for Chris being a fab, assigned female at birth. Blue, a gay, femme-presenting ballerina. Yellow, a gay, mass-presenting cowboy. Green, non-binary. Pink, the trans boss who was previously exclusive to, say it with me, the Switch port of Undertale. And Seth, who was maybe the most interesting one, formerly purple, but recently transitioned to Seth and chose to be non-binary. Seth is always worried about how people accept them, but, you know, in the end, $5 is $5. You are who you are. Literally a role model for Chris and the crew. It's lovely. Being the one most interested in reflecting humanity, Seth is also the only one who actually gives a shit about gender, unlike the other ones. Again, you see this conversation in one of the Flowery tables. Most of the other people are like, yeah, gender, Green's just already non-binary. Seth puts thought about it because Seth is the closest to being human. So again, this is how Flowery and his friends sort of sit on the whole gender binary. We seem to be forgetting someone. That's because Green serves a very, or did I just say Green? Orange serves a pretty different purpose. I love her, but she's basically there, as the newsletter succinctly put it, to show how distorted their perception of humanity is rather than comment on gender. But the fact that all 6 of the other flowers make a certain, and sexuality, the fact that all 6 of the other ones fit in is kind of fucking crazy. You were saying something, Lucy? True, and that is a strong enough agreement. I just don't have a lot to say past that. It is much like my argument with Queen, in that she is embodying a typically masculine role. Also, I guess the tail thing is itself challenging in a certain way. The perception of what is normal to be a human, which is cute. Even though I don't think, again, that was the ultimate intent. I think it is a perfectly fine reading, especially if we're following the reading I'm working on. We have to talk about Asgore's rejection, because Asgore does not come all the way to terms with what Flowery is trying to teach, unlike other people, and it has big consequences. Asgore's rejection of Flowery specifically gets people hurt. It gets him kidnapped, and it gets Flowery killed. That's a big fucking deal. So why does Asgore do this? Well, we hear about it some when Asgore talks at the end of the chapter, right? He blamed himself for what happened. Now, he doesn't specify, but if you're tuned in like us, we know that it's Des. All he ever wanted was to prove that Des's disappearance wasn't his fault. That it was all because of the Dark World. When Asgore rejects Flowery, he misses the point. As we've seen with Flowery's treatments of other characters, and we'll continue to see with Tralsei upcoming, he's teaching them through teasing and getting them to express in ways outside of their comfort zone, to be essentially, move past these stupid standards that exist in the light world because they are in the dark world. Things don't exist. The reason why he and the other flowers want to protect Asgore can be read in some ways as their desire to allow Asgore to fully explore himself. And he never gets there. Asgore misses the point that these two are very similar. Asgore ignores the truth. Flowery gets hurt. Asgore ignores his friend, and his friend gets hurt. They've both fallen in their own ways. Now, this might be a little shaky at times. I am a D1 Flowery Glazer. Flowery is not infallible. However, to provide some supplementary evidence, for one, I like to point out that the concept of the whole Dreamer and Holiday family combo was introduced in the same chapter as the Thruples, and I just find that to be a bit too big of a coincidence to accept. But even if you're disregarding that, do you think it's not a coincidence that this is that in Chapter 5, the only route that Pizza Pants learns the truth in Asgore's chapter is the gay option? The option that will probably ultimately lead to the best outcome? And again, thanks to Elias for this point, because it's incredible supplementary evidence. I see that as Toby Fox signaling quite clearly that there is a very easily ignored truth. 2 out of the 3 options lead you down a false path, but the third one is what's right, even if it hurts. Okay. I talked a lot about Asgore in terms of how heteronormativity shapes him, but let's look at the flip side of someone going down a more positive route. Tralsei. First, we gotta do some required reading. Now we're going to talk about Tralsei and assigning roles. Tralsei is of the Dark World, tied to the prophecy, lacking his own identity, but over the course of the game, we've seen him pushing further and further away from the prophecy, and it still hasn't fully happened. If you reject Tralsei's dress during the climbing section, he directly addresses how he'll continue to dress how people want. But he's not happy with it. We see him in the butler outfit, which is rather masculine this chapter, and he's really not happy with it. He doesn't comment on it when he fucking throws it in the water. Tralsei, meanwhile, is really excited whenever he is wearing the dress, because he's experiencing this, this fluidity that he is craving, but is not able to actually chase because he is so concerned with dressing in and appearing and playing out his role, the role he sees. I say us, I'm Prince of Prophecy, and I include this comment that I found because it made me die laughing, but also because it rings horrifyingly true. Tralsei is the Prince of the Prophecy. When you meet him, he's literally dressed like the panel. They says we are on a journey foretold exactly by the prophecy. But by chapter 5, we see Flowery pushing Tralsei to make his own choices, to like things that the game itself commands that he doesn't like as much as he does. Get your fave, don't worry about Chris. Versus that one drink that Tralsei, that actually does 200 HP for Tralsei, but he refuses to drink it out of battle. Tralsei's conversation with Flowery is important. We'll touch on it in a second. Because Tralsei is, assigned to be Prince of Prophecy, he can't really explore in his mind the role of princess. Similar to how Susie is foretold to wear ribbons, but she refuses for most of the game, which sets Tralsei off in the first chapter. He's like, oh, okay, I guess I'll wear them. And he does. And speaking of that last Flowery Tralsei combo, we gotta look at it.
Can all you like serving humans? I'm only trying to help you.
Tralsei has a very interesting relationship with choice. That last talk is essentially refuting Tralsei's idea that the flowers have to fulfill their purpose, stopping Asgore from the grief that eats away at him. But the flowers can have their own purpose, and Tralsei can too. That's Flowery's point. It is hard for him to get at. Some bonus points, all of the rest of the stuff you see is a little unrelated to choice, I must admit. In some ways. And in others, it is exactly the point. Let's look at how Asgore and the power menu refer to Tralsei. They look a bit like Asriel. If they're a monster, watering their own thorns. Tralsei is maybe in the process of transition right now. I don't say that, to be like hot button or anything. It is, Toby Fox is very particular with pronouns. He's, just like I have said, he's very particular with certain aspects like choosing king and queen versus royalty. Which leads me to believe that Tralsei could actually transition in-game. I mean, this chapter alone, again, we have all these more expressive outfits. Tralsei dresses up as 2 female Ace Attorney characters. Maya and Phoenix Wright's sister, I think? Adopted sister, that one. I don't fucking know. I saw her last name was Wright when I was picking out the image. Okay, put that out of the way. I hope you can see where I'm getting at, because this is all bringing it back to that initial idea that heteronormativity is a poison. Heteronormativity in Asgore's Dark World seeps in and causes harm in a way that we don't experience in other Dark Worlds. Despite Flowery's attempts to save Asgore and transform the game, Asgore still rejects him. And this kind of ties back to the core themes of Deltarune itself and its Dark Worlds. The Dark Worlds before this chapter had mainly been a source of escapism and personal growth. I highlighted these moments specifically for Susie as the easiest examples to point to. Susie and Gerson, Susie and Noelle, moments that helped Susie grow as a person. We have seen the same with Chris. I've already listed them and how Chris has grown, especially in that one moment from chapter 4 with Susie, the acceptance of the knife, Tralsei as everything I just went over. These are moments of growth that Asgore wouldn't reach. And as such, the Dark World has become dangerous because people are actually getting hurt. What am I getting at, though? Deltarune's made it pretty clear at this point that the Dark World is to the Light World what Deltarune is to the player. It's a space to learn, grow, and experiment. But the world outside is seeping in and making things dangerous. And the same is true the other way around. The Dark World is seeping into the Light World and making things dangerous. And as a result, aspects of each world that don't mesh with each other are seeping into each other. Heteronormativity is a symptom, not a cause, not the core of the problem. They are poisoning the Dark World because it is a poison that already existed in the light, and because they are crossing over as per the general themes and plot of Deltarune. Heteronormativity is one of the biggest core themes of this chapter because it is a perfect way to show how these worlds are influencing each other. So where do we go from here?
Here I come, San Francisco Polycule.
Obviously. Evil San Francisco Polycule, all the beautiful shit you could think of. All this to say, on a more serious notes, Deltarune isn't like just a game about acceptance, as a final note. It's about the way that reality and escapism mix for better and for worse. If you get too lost in escapism, like we maybe see Susie doing at the end of chapter 5, sadly, you're getting lost into things that aren't real. But also, it is important to escape from reality so that you can appreciate it more. A mix is important, and that's why I tie up the general themes of Deltarune into this heteronormativity discussion, because escapism is the healing point. And when you ignore it, for instance, if you choose to ignore a key facet of the things you are trying to escape from and bring it in, and don't try to openly let that affect you, the way our protagonists do, and be more like Asgore, you're gonna wind up on a hurt path, and you're gonna wind up on a path that hurts other people. Rudy, Flowery, Carol, Toriel. Dessa's disappearance wasn't Asgore's fault, but a lot of what happened afterwards was. And again, that is why I tie up Deltarune's core themes. These are things that could be avoidable, and I don't know where Deltarune's going to go. It could go towards a happier ending where we sort of come to terms with these kind of things, or it could easily turn for the tragic.
Alright, now we got all that bullshit out of the way,
The real theory starts now. Okay, is Gaster homophobic? We don't fucking know. But look at this. There's fucking Sham and Jevil broken up. Tenna and Spampton broken up. Also, for some reason, Gaster has the same room as fucking Tralsei. What the fuck?
I think I figured it all out.
All right, that's it. Thanks, y'all. I worked really hard on this shit. It took me fucking ages to put this together, but I'm really proud of it. Thank y'all for letting me show this to you.